Thank you and welcome to the show for today. The topic this morning is African American history at the 21st century. And we're fortunate to have with us to talk about the African American history experience, Dr. EKSanford from Tennessee State University. And of course, Dr. Sanford, you've been with us on many, many occasions, and you've given us such excellent information. And let me welcome you to the show this morning. And let's start off by having you to give us some information in reference to your background, your education, and your experiences. And then we'll get into some other aspects of African American history, the African American history experience at the 21st century as far as the African American History Month is concerned. Let's start with that. And I think, as you know, it did not start as African American History Month, but so let's do it from that perspective after we talk about your background, education, and your experience.
Absolutely, and thank you so much again for having me here. I'm Dr. EKSanford, and as you said, I'm a professor of sociology at Tennessee State University. I started in reverse. I did a postdoc education at Penn State University and State College, Pennsylvania, in gerontology and evaluation research. Did my doctorate degree, very proud of, at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And there I also worked with the national headquarters of the American Red Cross, doing HIV/AIDS education research and evaluation unit there. Kind of interesting because right here in Nashville with Dr. Ed Sullivan, there's a first response center, and I worked with Dr. Jackie Fleming on that project here, and that stemmed from that earlier work in Washington, D.C. Also worked with the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives in Washington, D.C. That was an excellent experience. Did my undergraduate work at North Carolina Central University in Durham, North Carolina. As also, I was at the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan, and that was a wonderful educational experience. But as I look back on that time at Howard University, with Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday becoming a holiday, I was at all of the protests from the time Stevie Wonder started it to the time that it finally went into fruition with the President Reagan of all people to make it come to be a birthday for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
And so, excuse me, in a real sense, that was really an addition to the African American historical experience, as well as African American History Month or African American History Week. Let's look at some of the things that, when you think about the African American history experience or the concept of African American History Month, let's say something about that during the last couple of minutes that we have.
Okay, and very good. We have to give credit to Dr. Carter G. Woodson. He was a noted scholar who was the second African American to graduate from Harvard University, received his first 2 degrees from the University of Chicago, but was born in Virginia, whose father was a slave. So he had the foresight and insight to know that there was a need to talk about and to put into record, into concrete within the system of America, that are the contributions that African Americans had made from slavery to freedom to the present. So Dr. Carter G. Woodson was the founder of what was called then African American History Week. And he put it on the time that he said it should be the second week in February because it was a unique birthday time of Frederick Douglass as well as Abraham Lincoln. So he thought that that would be a good time to celebrate it, since Abraham Lincoln, of course, supposed with the Emancipation Proclamation and Civil War 1861-1865, ended slavery and brought about those constitutions to abolish it. And Frederick Douglass, of course, was in the forefront of helping that decision to be made. So he found that that was a wonderful time to try to celebrate it. And as I recall coming up as a youth in school, it seemed like it was a day, although he had African American, what they called at that time Black History Month. It seemed like it was a one-day thing. And then it grew from one day to a week, and then from a week to African American History Month as we celebrate it today.
Very good. You know, looking back over that experience, that is the establishment of how did people react to that? African Americans especially. Yeah,
well, I think it was a time of celebration, a time of wanting to have that pride, but I think the problem was, and as Dr. Carter G. Woodson wrote in his book entitled The Miseducation of the Negro, he felt that not only did African Americans did not know about the history and contributions, that also the majority group didn't either. So he felt, I think, as a primary thesis of the book, The Miseducation of the Negro, that it would bring a certain sense of pride to that group to know about the history, to know the contributions that they made to the American culture, and that from that point on, when that African American History Week was founded, that it would grow and grow and grow, and that people would have a certain sense of pride. But I think ultimately he had wanted to become a part of the institution of education, from elementary school to junior high to high school, that people would learn about it, and then would be celebratory for all different ethnic groups throughout the United States.
Very good. Let's stop here, and we're going to have our first commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you, and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. The guest is Dr. EKSanford from Tennessee State University, a sociologist at Tennessee State University, and he's given us some information in reference to African American History Month at the 21st century. During the first segment, he gave us quite a bit of information in reference to the establishment of the African American History Week that would eventually become African American History Month. And so, Dr. Sanford, let's pick up where we left off the last time and give you an opportunity during the second segment to explore this whole idea of African American history at the 21st century.
Okay. Well, as then, I think even now, there's a great importance to still research, to have out there within the educational system the contributions that have been made by African Americans. We can look back over the earlier time period from 1619 with slavery for 244 years, 81 years of Jim Crow laws, leading to Reconstruction, and then from that time period into the Civil Rights Movement, and how those advances really contributed to the greatness of America. And I think when Dr. Carter G. Woodson founded that, he wanted everyone, not only African Americans, but everyone within the American ethos, within the American culture, to know about the contributions that were made, really, to the economic development of the American society. When you think of human beings being snatched from their homeland and brought over as an economic institution, enslaved for hundreds of years, it was really the foundation of this economy. And so we have to look at that as an institution. And that institution helped founded what we have today. When we look at certain things on our tires, driving around with the Goodyear or the Vanderbilts and other types of companies, many of those funds came out of the backs of the African Americans that were indeed slaves during an earlier time period of how the economy was. And of course, there was a war that took place from 1861 to 1865. More people were killed in order to maintain enslavement at that time period than any other war with those that have been dead since that time. It's an interesting phenomenon because sometimes when we think about those contributions that we made, and he had the book that was entitled The Miseducation of the Negro, he wanted some accurate information to be talked about those contributions. And he felt that that would bring a certain sense of pride to a group of people in the redefinition of themselves as they move forth from the time of slavery to now, and he felt that that education would help. I would like to try to make a comment on the notion that how it was important then, but even most important now in the 21st century, because in many instances that whole idea of the miseducation has not come into full fruition because it has been misconstrued. It hasn't really been a history that has been forthright in all of the textbooks, from elementary school to junior high school to high school, for parents to then reinforce it at home, for the school systems to reinforce it in projects and in a large way. Although we live in the 21st century and we can Google Dr. Carter G. Woodson, and a large amount of information would just come up about him, but if you don't know about him, then you won't have the insight to even Google him, to know him. But so it's important, I think, for us to still bring that into our projects in schools so people will have a sense of pride about it. There are a lot of different documentaries. But it's sad to say, as we look at the Generation X in the 1980s, born during that time, or the millennium groups that's born in the 90s to the present. And I did mention at the outset, but in 1985, I was one of 25 scholars that were invited to Harvard University. And there we talked about that millennium group. And we said that they would be born and they would not have any insight as to what was going on during the '60 movement that would have given them the freedom that they have today in our present society. Now, as we think about African American History Month, I think that was the central problem probably Dr. Carter G. Woodson was having with conversations with other scholars at that time. Well, how do we bring some insight to people about what had happened for hundreds of years prior to a time of the brink of the 20th century that then we needed to know about?
And the impact that it has upon the 20th century itself.
Absolutely. And without that information, he said we'll be misinformed, miseducated. So he felt that that was an important thesis in his book, The Miseducation of the Negro, that it would bring information, insight, pride, a willingness to want to be able to share with succeeding generations. So the question becomes, in an evaluative way, to what degree has that succeeded or not? And we were in '85 at Harvard University at the Du Bois Center. W.B. Du Bois, who was the first African-American to graduate from Harvard, and Dr. Carter G. Woodson was the second. You know, here you are thinking in terms of a new group of people that wasn't even born at that time, and they would not recognize it. And as a professor, I'm finding that to come very true, and I think it's probably that way throughout the United States. Now, this problem isn't just for African Americans. I think it is for the majority group as well. And I think he didn't want it to be just for just that one group to understand it, but he felt that that was at the core, but he wanted everyone to appreciate it. Therefore, we had this whole revolution with the diversity in higher education, where certainly the curriculum would be a little bit more enhanced to have the histories of all ethnic groups to be included versus excluded within the curriculum, so that there would be an appreciation. Now, the larger notion of that is looking at it sociologically as how we are made up of different institutions. And so you would think our government and people that will make it up will be a bit more understanding and sensitive to issues related